Welcome to A Walk in the Garden. I'm Liz Davey and you're watching a garden and cooking show on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. This is episode 36 and we've been filming about every 2 weeks to a month in my garden here in Norfolk, seeing how the season has gone and following the growth of the plants throughout the growing season. It's now December and it's amazingly warm for December today. I could even take off my jacket, but it's a little chilly but amazingly warm. We've had a warm fall all the way around. The garden is pretty much finished and we've had a lot of time to get ready for winter, which we presume is coming at some point, probably a little late like it did last year. I've put on my roses, which I have a few in my herb garden, and I've put on some compost around each one. And since we have the time, I'll be adding some crushed leaves on top of that, just to give it a little extra protection. These will be raked off in the spring and the compost spread around. But this just gives a little extra protection to some of the rose bushes. We actually can still pick a few of the herbs. Most of the thyme still has nice green leaves that can be picked. And even the chives, though they've died down some, can still be used if you need just a few for a garnish. Of course, the sage will stay green pretty much all winter and can be picked all winter as long as you can get into the garden and it isn't covered with snow. But for the most part, the herb garden is ready to go to sleep for a while. And we'll wake it up again in the spring when the warm weather comes. Now I'm going to move over to the perennial garden very briefly because that's pretty much ready for winter too. The perennial garden has been cleared of most plants. I've cut them at the ground except the parts that are still green. Some of the plants put on basal foliage in the fall and those are still here. You leave that all winter. It may die back or it may stay green. Oak leaves continue to fall and I'll just leave those on as somewhat of a mulch for the winter. I've mulched a few tender plants with the marsh hay and that will stay there also. Don't be alarmed if you have bulbs coming up. These are grape hyacinths and they normally do come up in the fall. And other plants, because of the warm season, may start to emerge. For instance, daffodils may start coming up in some of the sheltered places. So if they do come up, don't be alarmed. It will not hurt them and they'll come back up in the spring even if they are winter killed a little bit. I've covered tender perennials with old baskets, old flower pots, anything that has some air circulation. And I filled those with the oak leaves. We did that last time. Put a rock on them, and those are all done, and they'll stay there all winter. Again, this rose will probably get a layer of crushed leaves if the weather permits. I've left a few things standing, like the sedums. The seeds the birds may enjoy, and also they give a little winter interest to the garden. They look really nice with a little snow on them. Most of the peonies were cut back. This is a tree peony and this does not ever get cut back. It will be leafing out in the spring to form the peonies. It's a different type of thing in that it's a tree peony rather than the herbaceous peony. If we were to cut this to the ground, we would get new sprigs coming up, but they would not bloom. Again, most of this is completely ready for winter and it will just sit here and take a nice rest for the rest of the season. Moving into the vegetable garden now, and I'll go down this way. The vegetable garden looks a little different than when you were here last time. We've covered some of the things that are still growing or need covers for the winter with marsh hay, and the rest of the garden has been pulled and composted. We could also be tilling it up. I've covered the kale, the youngest kale that I had, with a little of the marsh hay, and because of the warm season, we could still pick some of this kale and consume it. It's still good. I don't know if we will have it come up again in the spring. I'm taking a chance on this by keeping it covered a bit, and hopefully we'll have a very early season of the kale at this season. The strawberries are resting under a nice blanket of marsh hay, and they're still green under there, and they will turn a bit brown over the winter, and then in the spring we'll remove the mulch and they'll start growing. And the mulch will also, some of it will be left so that the strawberries can rest on a clean surface. Moving over to the parsley, it's under some of the mulch as well, but it's still very pickable, which is very unusual for almost mid-December. I can come out here and get parsley anytime I need it. I'm covering it up. Ultimately, it will wilt and be frozen, but I'll continue to use it until it does freeze. Then next spring, it will sprout new growth, and we'll have a very early season of parsley. At that point, because it's a biennial, it will go to seed, and I will be planting a new crop that will take over from it. This area has our garlic that we planted in October, and you can see it's coming up. Again, I mulch it, and it may or may not turn brown and lose that top growth, but it will be coming up very early in the spring. Now I'm going to go over to where I've done some winter decorating with some of the greens that I've picked. This is the side of the garage, and I've had window boxes going here all summer. I planted some sweet alyssum in these boxes. I planted the seeds back in about June, and it's still going strong and blooming and flowing over the edge of the window box. We also have in here some other things that are still green, and they will continue for a while, but I do take out the annuals that have gone by, and I replace them with some of the greens that I've cut from the garden. The holly berries are very pretty this year. They add a lot of color, and now is the time you can snip and trim some of the evergreens and use those clippings and the red twig dogwood sprigs that you've pruned, and use the prunings to fill window boxes and containers. I've also used the broom corn that I grew and some of the sedum to fill in milkweed pods, Lacothway from the bush that also needed trimming, and these make a nice winter decoration, kind of brighten things up and not look so bleak. The snapdragons again are still going in this window box. In fact, they even have buds, and with the warm weather that's predicted, I imagine I'm going to have some pink snapdragons blooming at this season. Almost unheard of for December, but I'll take any color we can get. The rest of the things will stay for the winter, and then I'll take them out in the spring when it's time to plant more annuals. I have another pot right here, and this one serves two purposes. First of all, it's decorative, and again I've added the twigs and the other greens that are growing and that needed trimming. This serves the purpose also of marking the path. This is the path that goes around to my back door, and by marking the path, when we do the snow blowing, you can't see where the path is, and this kind of marks it. There's a stone wall on the other side and then this planter on this side. Therefore, we know where the path is and where it turns to go back to the back door. It proved to be very handy last year when we had great amounts of snow, and we could see where we could do the snow plowing without damaging a lot of plants. Now I'm going to go back near the patio, and then we will be going into the house a little later. Coming into the birdhouse area, bird feeding area, not birdhouse, I've been keeping them filled with bird seed, and it's a chore this year. The birds are really hungry. In spite of the fact that we don't have snow, they're really going through the seed. I'm going to start adding suet soon. This is one of the suet cakes that you can buy, and this bird feeder has a little slot you can put it in, and the roof kind of covers it up. I usually don't add the suet until the temperature gets quite a bit colder, and then I'll have 2 suet cakes in. The woodpeckers, flickers, red-bellied woodpeckers, even the other birds really seem to enjoy the suet, especially when the weather's cold. Right now, a lot of seed eaters are up here. When I fill my feeders, I always spill some on the ground, and there are a number of birds that are ground feeders, and they like that too. Every once in a while, I come out with my leaf blower and blow all the seed off the patio to kind of keep things neat. This is setting on a garbage can for a reason, an upturned garbage can. It's not the prettiest support for it, but it does work. This one is very accessible. I have a hanging bird feeder as well, but I take this one inside at night. When Buddy comes out for the last time at night, I usually bring this in and set it by the door. That keeps the raccoons and other creatures from eating all the seed during the night. Then in the morning, when he goes out, usually first thing in the morning, we bring the bird feeder back out to its position. Birds generally don't feed at night, but the little rodents and squirrels and raccoons and other things do feed at night. And this will be, if I forget to bring it in, completely empty by morning. Not to mention the confusion out here when my friend Buddy sees little animals outside his window. So we take that one inside. Now I'm going to go down to a tree that's in bloom. Believe it or not, I have some blooms in December. This tree is what's called a fall blooming cherry, and it blooms in the spring, and then it has a second flush of little pink blooms in the winter, in the fall, late fall, early winter. It's blooming a little later this year, I think, but it blooms quite late, and it's kind of a curiosity, but it's supposed to bloom at this time. It doesn't mean that it's blooming because of the extra warm weather we've had. Although some trees and shrubs I've understood from people I've talked to are putting out some blooms or even new leaves because of the unusually warm fall we've had. But this one is supposed to bloom, and it's kind of an interesting tree to have 2 sets of blooms. I think it probably would bloom more profusely if it got a little more sun. It's in a somewhat shaded area. Now, let's go inside and work on some Christmas decorations, and I'll meet you in there, and then we'll do some cooking. I'm going to put together a few Christmas decorations that will go outside or inside, but working with greens and cones today. And this is a wreath that I purchased, and it's a plain wreath, and it's fun to decorate wreaths. And this one I'm going to do with some fruit. And what I've done, I'm going to use pineapple and apples and a lemon, and if you had a larger wreath, you might want to use more of the fruit. I coat the fruit with floor wax, clear floor wax. This gives it a shiny coating, and it will last a little longer. You're not going to eat this fruit anyway. It's purely for decoration. And this will go outside. For the pineapple, that we will eat because I've hollowed it out. I used a grapefruit knife to hollow out the pineapple, and then I filled each one with shredded newspaper and put wire through it in several places, cutting the pineapple in half. We can get the effect of 2 pineapples using 1 pineapple. And these will, outside, especially if the weather becomes colder, they'll last quite a long time this way. And I'm going to position my fruit on the wreath at first, and I want to make sure I have a good top, and they put a little, these come with a little hanging thing that's not particularly strong. So what I'm going to do is use a piece of this wire and make my own hanger, and that will be at the top of the wreath. It's a little bit stronger than the thin wire that they use. And you can just twist it around the wreath. Twist it. The wire that I'm using with the fruit is a coated wire. If you use plain wire, it will cut the fruit and the fruit will rot right away. This has a kind of thread or fabric type coating. This wire is available at the craft stores like Michael's or A.C. Moore. And I'm going to position the pineapples, and I'm going to put the green apple in the middle. So we'll put the green apple exactly opposite my hanger. If you don't like to tie bows, this is a great way to decorate a wreath. And this wire, being 18 gauge, goes right through the fruit without any problem at all. And then I'm just going to twist it around the wreath, kind of through the evergreen parts around it. And loop them all around the back. Extra wire back there can either be twisted or cut off. And then I'll add my center lemon. At the top. Then you can work around those to keep it somewhat symmetric. And again, you just wire it around. If you have a bigger wreath, you can use more fruit. You could also add some sprigs of holly or other decorations. But we'll get these pineapples on next. Pineapples are known as a sign of friendship and greeting, so they make a nice addition to a wreath, entry wreath. This is a heavy wreath, so you'll want to hang it securely from a secure area. Sometimes the top needs to be supported with a little lighter wire. The top, it doesn't matter if you pierce it or not. Check our positioning a little bit. And then we'll add 2 red apples up around the lemon. Tuck some of the greens in around it. And that's a pretty quickly decorated wreath, which would look very nice on a front door or a fence near the house. I'll possibly put this out on my fence. The wildlife may bother it a little bit, but that's okay, they need to eat too. And I need to put this down. Maybe it will sit right here for now. The next thing I'm going to make is a swag, and that's basically a bunch of greens tied together, and another easy decoration. It's nice if you use a variety of greens. The base greens I was able to get, they were cut off Christmas trees. If you stop by a Christmas tree salesperson, they often will give you some of the greens that are cut off the bottom if you don't have enough to pick for yourself. I'm going to add some other greens into this as we go, just a few. But basically you need to use for this one what's called paddle wire, and it's a thin wire that comes on a stick. It's what all the florists use, and again, it's available at AC Moore. And I'm going to start by just securing it tightly to one of the branches. And then as I go, I'll add in one at a time, taking a few twists around each one to hold it together. If you start by just twisting the whole bunch together, some of them will no doubt fall out. So you want to wire each one in, and then take a couple turns around the whole thing and continue wiring individual branches in at the top. I've used some of the cuttings from my yard in addition to the ones that were available through the Christmas tree sales. Scraps. The holly I did cut from my yard, that goes on top. And I'll wire that in as well. I think I want to put a piece of Leucothea in first. This is Leucothea, which is a broadleaf evergreen that grows well in the shade. We've talked about that one before. And it holds up quite well outdoors, both in outdoor arrangements and in wreaths and swags. Rhododendrons do not. Rhododendrons will curl when the temperature gets cold. This one keeps its leaf shape. And I'll let one of its leaves just kind of cover up the top. And go around a couple times. And put some more of the holly in here on top. I'll wind around a few times and then fasten this off around one of the larger stems with a few twists and then a knot. Again, I'll add a piece of the heavier wire for a hanger and wind it around. Towards the back and around again. As tight as possible, and then fasten it together with a knot. Now it's time to decorate it, and you can use a variety of things to decorate. For this one, I have a purchased piece that I can put in, and again, that can get wired right in. I try to keep these things separate because I might want to save some of these pieces for another time. This one has some fruit on it, but it isn't real. And again, we can just wire that on. I've added a few pine cones, and we can add some more of those if you want, but this is starting to look okay. And if you want to add a little bling, I'm not going to today, but you can add any number of purchase decorations to this, little balls, little packages, other things to make it a little shiny, if that's what you want to do with it. And those, again, these usually have a flexible stem that can just be, maybe we will do it, just fastened around some of the branches. Pretty easy to add those in. By just going around through, fastening them on underneath. Taking off the labels as we go. And let's put this one over here. And again, I want to go down all the way to one of the larger branches before I fasten it in. You can always add some of the wire if it needs to be tighter. And the last thing we'll do is add a nice bow, which you can either make yourself or purchase. And that finishes a nice swag that can be hung on a light post or on a fence post, or even a door or the side of a door. And we'll put that one over here. You can also add Christmas balls if you wish to that. Yeah, any kind of decorations that you'd like. Working with pine cones, in Norfolk we seem to have plenty of these falling off the trees, and there are certain things you can do to make them easier to work with. These are cones that I picked up in the yard, and I have baked them, and you bake them on foil. When you pick up pine cones, they'll have very sticky pitch all over them. They're hard to work with, and in order to get rid of that, I bake them at about 200 degrees, no more than that. They are flammable, so 200 degrees on foil for 30 minutes. Make sure to time them and not to have a high temperature, or they will burn or catch fire. You have to be careful doing it, but it does make them dry, and also it gives them kind of a shine when the pitch from the pine cone dries. To use the pine cones to make wreaths or something like that, you can use a wreath frame, and once you soak those pine cones, even though the pitch is gone, they completely shrink. This is why you don't want to put your pine cone wreath outside. But what you can do is use one of these wreath forms, and it has kind of two layers, and you basically just force the pine cones in between the layers while they're wet, some one way and some another. You fill the whole frame up with these cones. Takes a little time, effort. And then when they dry, the cones will again become full pine cones. And this will fill out the wreath really nicely. So you soak them first after you've baked them, and then put them into the wreath. What you come out with, after you've gotten the base done, then you can add cones to the top. And some of these are cones that were cut. You can also add any little pods or other tiny cones that you find, either with hot glue or by wiring them in, and you end up with a pine cone wreath like this, which is very long lasting. You can give it a spray with some clear acrylic, and it will last for a very long time. Other things you can do with greens would be to make a basket. And a greens basket is very easy to make. And you can get all kinds of little decorations for it. But just using greens from your yard, pine cones from the yard, you would use a product called Oasis, which we've used before. It's the floral foam, again, available at craft stores. And you would put it into your container. You can tape it in if it doesn't fit well into the container. And then put that into your basket to keep your greens from drying out. And then add various greens and decorations and make a nice basket decoration, which I'll put over here. These are paper white narcissus, and I planted these a month ago in this glass bowl. And to plant them, I used marble chips and put a layer in, set my bulbs on it. This is one of the bulbs that hasn't been planted yet. These are available at garden centers throughout the fall season, also by mail order, along with amaryllis, which are also popular indoor bulbs. I set these in, put on more marble chips, watered them right up to the base of the bulb, and watched them grow. And this is 4 weeks later, and they're in full bloom. Some people don't like the scent of these, and they might want to keep them a little further away. I don't find it too cloying, but in quantity they can be very strongly scented. They tend to fall over a little bit. That's one of the reasons I used a tall bowl. And I also can put a ribbon around it to hold them in place so that they will stand up a little better. If in your work you happen to get pine pitch all over your fingers, there's a good way to get it off, and that is to use Crisco. And what you do is just take a little Crisco and rub it into your hands, and it will loosen all of the pine pitch that's on them. You get that either picking up the pine cones or working with the greens. And you can then wash your hands well, and the pine pitch comes right off. It's much easier on the skin than any type of solvent would be. Okay, let's go in the kitchen and do some cooking now. Today we're going to make several items which could be used either for a luncheon or a light supper, or with added entrees and side dishes for a complete meal. The first thing I'm going to start is a dessert, and today we're going to make a Christmas log, a chocolate log. And this is a very easy recipe using the food processor. I have 4 eggs in here now, and I'm going to add a cup of sugar and then process this until it's very light and lemon colored. You can see it's lightened up in color. I will add a teaspoon of vanilla and 1/3 cup of water. And we'll process that in. And then I'm going to add 1/3 of a cup of cocoa powder. This is unsweetened cocoa. And 1/2 cup flour, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. When you use chocolate cocoa, which has not been Dutched, when it's just regular cocoa, you generally need to add some sort of baking soda in order to take away from the acidity of the cocoa. I'm going to process this. Just until it's all mixed up. And put it into a baking pan. This is a, I think it's 11 by 17 pan, and it's been greased and then lined with parchment paper, greased again, and then floured. That's the important part because we want to get this out of the pan right after it's been baked. I'm going to pour it all into the pan. Spread it out for an even layer, and I'll bake that at 375 for 15 minutes. And while the cake is baking, I'm going to start some soup. I'm going to make a soup that is called chicken velvet soup. It's a cream of chicken soup. And we'll start by adding a cup of milk and a cup of light cream and 2 cups of chicken broth to our pan and heating that until it's warm. While it's heating, I have 3/4 of a cup of butter, which has been softened, and I'll add to that 3/4 of a cup of flour. This will be the thickening for the soup. And we want to mix that thoroughly while our milk and broth are heating. The idea behind using a roux, which is what this is, to thicken a hot mixture, is to cover the flour completely with a layer of fat, which would be the butter. So you want to make sure it's mixed quite well. Another way to thicken something is to start with your flour and butter heated and add the cold liquid. That will also work. You can't just dump flour into hot liquid or you get huge lumps, which is a reason for a lot of lumpy gravy. Now I need to wait until this warms up a little bit. We want the milk to be warm but not completely hot when we add in the roux, and we'll start stirring some of that in. We don't want it to boil, just be quite hot. But you definitely don't want a hard boil. If it starts to boil, then we'll take it off the heat for a few minutes. I'll whisk this in. And very quickly it will start getting thicker. It's started to thicken up now. And I will add the rest of the ingredients, which is another quart of chicken broth. And again, we'll continue heating this. We want it to become very warm, but not boil. 1.5 cups of cooked shredded chicken or chopped chicken. About 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. And 1/8 of a teaspoon of white pepper. Always best to measure pepper, not over the soup, or you may get in too much. I use white pepper in something like this because it's a very light colored soup and you really don't want big black flecks in it. And we'll continue to let that heat until it's not boiling but very hot, and then we can serve it. Very simple soup to make. Again, our cake has a little bit more time, and we have time to put together a spinach salad to go with this. And I have washed and dried a bowl full of spinach, and I'm going to add some other ingredients to it to turn it into a little fancier salad. I have a chopped tomato, and we'll spread that out a little bit. About 1/2 cup of chopped red pepper. You could use green pepper if you have that. A small onion chopped. Again, red or sweet would be desirable. Some cooked and crumbled bacon. This is a really good spinach salad. Some toasted walnuts. And some feta cheese. About 1/2 cup of each of these ingredients, although depending on what you like and how much you would like it. I'm not going to dress this salad right now. That's done shortly before we serve it. But I do have a dressing that I've prepared in the refrigerator. And this is kind of an interesting dressing. It contains oil, wine vinegar, some Worcestershire sauce, some chili powder, and some garlic for flavoring. So it's a rather spicy dressing for the spinach salad. And again, I'll be adding that later, right before the salad's served. Our soup's coming along well here. And our cake is almost finished. Time to get the cake out of the oven. Use some pot holders, and I have ready a towel that's been sprinkled with some cocoa powder. It's just an ordinary cleaned dish towel. I'm going to use a knife to go around the edge of the cake and then turn the cake over onto the dish towel that's been coated with chocolate and take off the parchment paper. At this point, I'm going to use the towel around the warm cake and roll the cake up, resting it on the seam end. We're going to let the cake cool in the towel. Now, while that's cooling, let's make a filling for the cake. And the filling's very simple. It's a cup of whipping cream, heavy cream. I'm just going to beat that up with my mixer. Pull that over this way. As the cream starts to thicken, I'll add about a teaspoon of vanilla. You could add peppermint extract, or you could also add almond extract, your choice. Peppermint and a little color, green color, would be nice. I'll also add 3 tablespoons of confectioner's sugar. The confectioner's sugar has a little bit of cornstarch in it, which kind of helps stabilize the cream. And we'll beat that until it forms stiff peaks. Now, through the magic of TV, we have a cooled cake, and I'm going to unroll it. Let's put the mixer back out of the way so you can see it. And I'm going to unroll the cake. This gets a little messy, but it'll all turn out fine. This is the cake that's been cooled completely in the towel. You can see it's still a little curly. And I'll add the whipped cream filling. If you don't want to use whipped cream in the cake and you want to make it ahead of time, you can use ice cream, any flavor that you prefer, and then keep it in the freezer until you're ready to serve it. I want to spread this out pretty evenly on the rolled cake. All the way down to the end. Then I'm going to re-roll the cake right off of the towel. Which will need to go in the washer. And put it on my serving platter. Seam side down. And now I'll frost the cake with a little chocolate frosting. You could eliminate this step and just to coat it with confectioner's sugar. I like the chocolate frosting. Gives it makes it into a bit of a Yule log. And then I like to decorate it, simulate bark by just dragging a fork through the frosting to make it look a little like bark. And if you want to have a knot hole in it, you can just run the fork in a circle That makes a little, like a knot hole in the wood. Then I'll decorate this with some of the things I've prepared ahead. I made some chocolate leaves out of a chocolate cookie dough. Put a few of those on it. And I also made meringue mushrooms, and these are not as hard to make as they look. You basically beat egg whites and sugar together. You do probably need to look at a recipe for the proper proportions. Then using a pastry bag, you form circles and little stems and put them together with melted chocolate. Put a few more of those on. And this is a traditional type Yule log made with a simpler recipe. And I like to sprinkle a little bit of cocoa over the meringue mushrooms. Now, let's assemble our meal in the dining room, and I'll see you then there. Okay, we're all set now with the addition of our Yule log cake for a nice little luncheon or perhaps a light supper. We have our soup, salad, and dessert. Thank you for joining me today. This has been A Walk in the Garden. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable. This is our last show this year. Be sure to join me next year for more walks in the garden. Thank you.